the Honorable Karen Evans, who has an extensive background in this community, including a couple of cabinet level CIO positions, extensive background in the private sector, as I mentioned, was the director of US Cyber Challenge, created it over a decade ago, came back into federal service, and is now with us in a current position as the CIO Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Tony Scott, the Honorable Tony Scott, who had the opportunity, my apologies, one other key position that Karen had is the same one that Tony had, which was the director of AKA Federal CIO at OMB. And it's fascinating to have you both on the stage here today. Tony's background very much in the private sector, a variety of companies, everything from Microsoft to VM to Disney, and certainly led the charge during the Obama administration at OMB, shepherding us through a lot of different activities there. It certainly was a privilege to work for Tony and work with Karen. And boy, we have two titans on the stage here today with us. You know, you put these two together and you've got some serious nuclear fusion here to bring us home. They certainly know this subject very well. Karen being a world-renowned cyber expert. Tony has seen it all, private sector, public sector as well. I'm going to hand it off to you all to take us home.
From a microphone perspective, are you guys hearing me any better?
Sounds great, Tony.
Perfect.
All right. Karen gave me a thumbs up, so I'll assume that I'm good. So I thought it was a really interesting day, and a couple of things really resonated from my perspective. One that I know all of you have heard from me many times talk about is the notion of technical debt. And we heard about other kinds of debt today too, not just technical debt, but also architectural debt. You know, the technical debt I define as, you know, leaving a bunch of old stuff in place that costs more and more and more to maintain. Architectural debt is really about the way things are put together. You might have new stuff, but they're put together in an old-fashioned way, and that causes issues. And we also heard, I think, about security and risk debt. That is, you know, things that haven't been done, that could have been done or should have been done to decrease, you know, the security profile of whatever organization we're working with. So I thought all of that was a really good discussion and something that we need to constantly remind ourselves about. And it tied into a concept that was talked about at the end of the day, which is cost. And I'm forever reminded that, you know, cheap sometimes results in higher costs in the long run when you look through the whole life cycle. And, you know, a lot of our procurement activity historically has been on trying to get things at the lowest price. And we call it technically equivalent in some cases. But what you realize if you've been around for any length of time is that the cost often is greater when you bought cheap in the first place, or you implemented on the cheap. And, you know, the ability to see down the road what the implications of doing something on the cheap now and what it's going to cost you later is an area that I think we all need to continue to focus on, so that we don't get in these technical debt, architectural debt, and security and risk debt kinds of situations. As that discussion was going on, I was reminded when I was at Bristol Myers Squibb, we had a procurement team who thought they had really done a great job and secured the lowest cost PCs we could find on the planet. And these were 20, 30% below the cost of everybody else in the marketplace. Now, what happened is when we got delivery of them, about 30% of them were dead on arrival. About 20% of them ran so hot that our employees were making jokes about using them as heaters in their office because, you know, they ran so warm. And when we looked at it after about 18 months, we discovered that we'd spent a lot more money replacing and handling all of these cheap PCs, and it taught all of us, I think, a very valuable lesson. I was encouraged and discouraged by the supply chain conversation. I think, you know, rightly so, a lot of focus has been on where things come from, who made them, you know, do we have fake parts? Do we have, you know, things in our environment that we don't want there? But I'm mindful of the fact that whatever we put in place tends to be there for years and years and years. And the biggest surface area for supply chain risk, in my view, is not necessarily on where things came from or so on, but what happens once things get installed. And so I'd say, you know, as a focus area, we need to, as a community, spend more time on those activities that are, I'll call it the operational supply chain, the maintenance activities, the software upgrades, the firmware upgrades, the hardware replacements, the people and technologies that are touching the systems once they're set up and in place. And, you know, when I look back over a long period of time where cyber incidents come from and where the bad stuff happens, the vast majority are in that space, not caused by somebody putting a bad chip in or, you know, some of those kinds of things. So while I think all of that is good, the supply chain risk, I think, let's not fool ourselves. You know, the real challenges are in that operational supply chain. Software bill of material, I thought was great stuff. And it's amazing to me how much progress has been made in that space in just a year since we last talked about it here. And I'm really pleased at a lot of the things I heard there. But I would say we need to expand it and not just think about it as software bill of material, but the complete bill of material. What are all the things in the environment that we're deploying? It's hardware, it's software, it's, you know, suppliers who are doing things to our machines in our environments. We really need, you know, a comprehensive sort of bill of material if we're going to manage all of the things in our world properly. I think it's not just software, but it's everything that goes into it. It's like thinking of a baseball team as just the players or just the bats and the mitts that they're wearing or the cleats that are on their shoes. And if we really want to understand what a baseball team is, it's the collection of a whole bunch of things, including the plays that they design and some other things. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep making progress on software bill of material. And then two final thoughts, and then I'd love to have a conversation with Karen. It seems to me that threaded throughout the conversation today and underlying a lot of it were continuous movement towards zero trust. That is, narrowing the aperture of the surface area where things can go wrong. And I strongly support zero trust, both as a concept, but I think we also need to make progress in terms of managing zero trust at scale, which is a little hard to do today. And also expanding the concept beyond the narrow ecosystem that each of us individually may control in our organization. Because after all, and I think it was shown in one of the diagrams today, we all participate in some big, broad ecosystem today. And for Zero Trust to really work well, it needs to cross organizational boundaries and span the ecosystem in which we participate. And then my final thought is, I was thinking as I listened to all the presentations today that depending on who you are, you could be a federal agency, you could be a private institution, you could be a nonprofit, you could be in the transportation business or the healthcare business, and your concerns and areas that you're maybe worried about or focused on might vary somewhat across all of the things that we talked about today. You might want to emphasize or have a stronger emphasis on some things and a little less of an emphasis on other things. And I call it context. It's how do we bring the organizational context into all the models and the technologies and the things that we talked about. So, you know, if you're a transportation company, as just as one example, you're going to have much stronger concerns in some areas than if you're a pharmaceutical company or a healthcare agency or a bank or whatever. And so in all of this great work that we're doing, I think we need to find some way of modeling contextually who the customer, who the client is, and look at things from both a risk perspective, but also this contextual perspective. It's very clear to me that no agency, no matter how wealthy, no matter what their budget, you just can't do everything. There's not enough people, not enough time, not enough resources, and that context and mission make a huge difference in terms of where one should spend energy and spend time, even given all the great stuff we heard today. And we should never give up. I'm not suggesting that we should. So that was kind of my thoughts on the day. I want to congratulate CISQ on doing a great job of putting together a super series of presentations and panelists. This is a don't miss event in my book every time. So thanks for doing a great job.
Fantastic, Tony, and I really do appreciate it. And you're right, it was a beefy schedule from top to bottom, that's for sure.
I can't hear Luke.
Tracy, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Luke.
Something's wrong with my speakers. Okay. Now I should be able to hear.
I was just re-emphasizing what a spectacular day it was, a very beefy agenda with lots of meaty conversation and lots of really top shelf presenters that are just on point and really on top of these various subject matters, one after the other. And I was really happy the way we were able to sort of break it up into bite-sized pieces. And the way the flow worked there, I thought was interesting. Tony, I think you might have a couple of questions you want to ask Karen.
Sure. First of all, great to see you.
It's great to see you as well, even if it's virtually.
Yeah,
it's great to see both of you on the screen. The Titans, there they are right there. I want a screenshot of that.
We only need, a few more, and then it'll be a complete panel. You probably wouldn't get any of us to be quiet on any of these topics going forward.
That's right. We can only handle 2 of you at a time here.
So the first question I have, Karen, is what's it like being back in the CIO seat? I thought you had graduated when you took the other job, but it seems like you have a passion for this and we know you're good at it. So what's it like?
Well, what's really fascinating was one to start in the middle of the pandemic. So that itself was a challenge. But the other part is seeing all the policies and the intent for the policies and how the department has implemented those and how the department has matured maybe beyond some of the policies from the original intent. And how, for example, the lines of business here at the department work together on a daily basis to achieve oversight and outcomes of the program. So I think, Tony, if you were sitting in my seat, you would be really thrilled at the teaming and the partnership across the lines of business here in the department to really achieve the outcomes that were intended, that OMB gives us outcomes and Congress gives us outcomes that they would like to achieve. And I think you would be happy at the maturity of the processes here in the department.
Well, that's great. And you know, you're now on the receiving end of the other end of the straw. You were on the giving end at one point. Any thoughts in terms of, you know, what you'd recommend to the next CIO or whatever now that you're back on the receiving end? What's most
She's
helpful?
implementing the policy she wrote 10 years ago.
Exactly. Actually, that does come up as a question a lot. Yeah, so I'll give you a great example, IPv6, right? And the implementation of IPv6 and how that got started during our administration, continued through your all's leadership, and is back again. And it's not really that it's back again, but it's actually, okay, now what's it going to take to get it over the line and get the dual stacks out of the network? It is fascinating to read the policies that then come out, and they're citing old policies that you actually signed off for. Because I know the Deputy Undersecretary for Management will ask during several of these meetings, did you start this policy? Do we have you? Who was, and so from that perspective, it's really very insightful. I think another area that benefits from having somebody who sat at OMB and now is back here in the seat of implementing a policy is really looking at the intents of OMB circulars, right? You know, near and dear to everybody's heart, A130, A123, A11. I think it's a little unusual. The staff was surprised. I think my first week here, they were talking about there's going to be an update to a geospatial circular. And I said, what? A16? They haven't done that in X amount of years. You know, we need to be. And so for the CIO to understand the importance of how often or not a circular gets updated, and then making sure to get component feedback so that OMB can benefit from the components use of geospatial data, you know, could be missed by someone who doesn't necessarily have the understanding of all the circulars. And so I think that's been a benefit, you know, going forward, and really understanding how they cascade, how they complement each other, and how OMB intends for them to be used together and not separate and distinct going forward. And I think that I would like to think that insight from my time at OMB is helping further improve the processes that are already here at DHS.
That's right. It's great advice, great thoughts. What are you most looking forward to in this role? You've got a couple of months now under your belt. What's coming up that you're excited about?
Well, what's really exciting, so as you know, when you're at OMB, you're influencing departments and agencies that this is the right thing to do, right? And so what is nice is in a CIO role, especially this particular CIO role, I have an operations section. And so based on being able to, I'm sure I'm not saying anything that Luke hasn't experienced about, like if a service goes down, that's bad news. But what also then happens is you're moving forward for new concepts, for new types of things. For example, we're very closely partnered with CISA, right? Because of the way that CISA has moved forward. So to be able to implement and show other departments and agencies through our own operations that this is what is intended by the guidance that CISA is giving out to federal civilian agencies, that's very exciting because that partnership, it's unique because they're a component within the department, yet they're providing guidance for all the civilian agencies. By us being able to demonstrate that and have that partnership and show them, like I get asked often, are you going to be part of the CUSMO? Of course we are, because they're part of the department and we are going to be implementing those services. How that evolves, we're excited because we have the opportunity to work with CISA directly to show what operationally will work. And I think that was the piece that you were talking about, the operational supply chain, the operational policies. That's what is exciting because I can actually implement and demonstrate capabilities.
Yeah, and I think if you can do that, it goes a long, long way in terms of credibility for the rest of government. When I was at Microsoft as CIO, we made a big deal about dog fooding all of our products and services internally before we would put them in the hands of customers. And boy, what a difference it makes if you can do that right, not only in terms of getting the products and services better, but in terms of the credibility with the potential customer base. So love to hear that. Love to see
exactly.
Even more progress on that.
Yeah,
well,
we're pretty excited. That's one thing that we're really very excited about doing is that partnership with CISA to really demonstrate capabilities as they continue in their role as the CUSMO.
Excellent. I don't know if we have any questions from the audience or not. I can't really see that. So I don't know, Luke or anybody, do we have any?
I'll jump in with one that's undoubtedly so a little bit along the theme of what you were talking about in regards to sort of re-entering into the atmosphere here. Is there anything that surprised you in regards? I remember when I left DHS, went over to DOJ for a couple of years, came back, and I thought to myself, the first thing was, wow, some of these things that were kind of front and center, a big deal, really been solved, right? But there's still a lot of topsy-turbulence, sort of way of operating at DHS that you didn't experience at say, DOJ. I'm just curious to know if there were things that kind of surprised you as far as, pluses or minuses in regards to, just being back at a department level agency in regards to whether it's operations or anything else.
So I think the question, and maybe I'll rephrase it a little bit, Luke, because you have a lot of knowledge also of the department, is some of the maturity of the processes. And I think when the department was standing up, that's when I was really engaged, right? So the department was standing up and a lot of things were very focused on planning and budget resources, making sure that the right resources were there, that you had robust planning activities. And now, as the department has matured, there are really robust management processes associated with execution. And so, that are vertical. So think of it as being vertical, and what now with a new set of eyes coming on board, and then and the background that I have looking across a portfolio as a whole, it's an opportunity for us to look horizontally again, and are there some gaps from the execution process that you need to tie back into resource and planning? And a great example that I'll give you is OMB is very focused right now, right, on the fiscal year 2022 budget. So we're starting on 21, but the department itself and the planning cycle is actually focused now on putting out guidance associated with fiscal year 23. And so between those three lanes, are there some gaps that we can make sure that we close as OMB gives us pass back guidance for 22, as the department is planning for 23? And I think it was both you and Kevin and everyone else talking about looking over the horizon and being able to make sure that whatever guidance is going to come from OMB in future years, that the department's planning guidance is taking that into consideration. So for example, artificial intelligence. And have we really looked at artificial intelligence from a resource planning perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, from a resiliency perspective, and making sure that we have those resources being thought about from the components as we construct those resources going forward for the budget?
It's interesting because you certainly have a sort of a dual perspective there, coming from where you've been in various roles, and it's interesting to see the perspective of making sure those tracks are laid down, there's good planning, so that you have the resources you need to implement all these things. One of the things that I can't resist asking about is the cyber workforce, right? And I know you've talked about it a couple of times in different forums, but there's probably a lot of people in this forum who haven't heard about CTMS and all the activity that is going on just across your whole cyber game, your cyber workforce. So can you give us the highlights so that the audience is tuned in?
So Luke, thank you so much for that question, because as you know, you and I are intimately familiar with CTMS and what is envisioned in that. The cyber talent management system going forward is really a way for us to be able to be competitive with private industry. And the real key to that, Congress has given DHS the approval to go forward, is that it's really going to take people that, and so we're calling it the DHS Cyber Security Service, is taking them from Title V, which is traditional, oh my goodness, you have to come in through USA Jobs, you have to understand that it's a 2210 with a parenthetical that could map over to the NICE framework that says, ooh, I'm looking for forensics analysis. The way that CTMS is set up is you actually come in and you'll come into a system and you'll take an assessment. And the way the assessments are lined out, they map to the NICE framework, but the assessments are going to say how your skill sets then map up to, for example, I am looking for a forensics analysis person. And so as you come through, it'll say, hey, this person is qualified. And then the other piece of what it then does is it maps based on the skills that you come through the assessment to private industry salaries. So when I come through and then I say, oh, I'm going to hire somebody, I don't have to say, well, they're a GS-15 at a step 10 to make it this. They actually get paid at a salary rate commensurate with private industry. So they're never going to have a GS associated with them. They're coming through and they're going to be, it's Title VI. So the rules are being published in the Federal Register. We're a pilot, CISA is a pilot. And the idea is, like, say, for example, a high school kid comes through and they qualify at the highest rate. So that whole argument about private industry and salary and all this other stuff, and we can't compete with private industries, CTMS takes that away. They get all the benefits of federal government service, but they don't have to understand how to navigate through the process. And it is an assessment-based approach. And so the other piece of that is it also then determines what other additional training, what's your career path, how to continue to progress through, so that we can then retain those people within the cybersecurity service as well.
That sounds outstanding. I'm sure everyone's going to want to know, what's the timeline on that to implement that?
Well, right now, because the one piece that we don't have authority not to do is we have to promulgate the rules. So we do have to publish them in the Federal Register, and we do have to
Sure.
get feedback. So the Chico is doing that, but and working with Office of Management and Budget. So we anticipate that the pilot will run in May, and that's when
Wow.
we're going to do our first cohort coming through.
How many
Outstanding.
slots do you think you'll get in that first group?
Well, we have in the OCIO office have designated 40 slots, and CISA has designated 100. So
Great.
we're kind of hoping that we max out as soon as we start, so that a lot of the parts of what we're doing here within the department, and so one of our other big initiatives is the NOSC, which is the Network Operations Security Center, where we're doing this Security Operations Center optimization and then moving it into this operational new entity, which is going to keep the operations up, but keeping network operations and security operations together. So we are staffing for the future. So based on that, we're looking for the right mix between contractors and federal employees so that we can actually then run people and positions. Our idea is to be able to hire them through the CTMS process.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah, but that's something we're really very excited about. And that again takes partnership with Chico, our Chico group. And so we're intimately working with them on the assessment tools and how to map that. And then I think if I took the assessment, I would find out that I shouldn't be a network person trying to keep the network up. I think that might be a skill set that I'm going to have to go back and get more training for if they put me in networks operations on the first tier. So it's pretty robust, and we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I guess based on an assessment, you might be relegated to the second shift of the NOCs, first tier, right?
Yes,
I know I would be. I'd be on the third shift. Hey, you talked about budget formulation. Let's talk a little bit about budget execution. There's this discussion out there about, should the as we sort of all, I say we, you all, kind of, your budget's taking a little bit of a haircut there in regards to tightening up the belt on the budget, and the IT budget being sort of mushed inside of the CIO's organization, and then in some cases, I'm not saying you all are doing this, but it's one of these. Well, we're just going to kind of peanut butter spread that, and everyone's going to take a hit, and that's how we're going to find our 20%. Versus, no, we're going to fence this over here and make sure that we keep good, strong security. As Tony said, we don't want to pay for it later, right? It's the most expensive $10 we'll ever save kind of thing. What's your thought on that, Karen and or Tony, both of you actually? It's just sort of the best way that you all have found to kind of manage that kind of situation. As you kind of everyone's competing for resources, and the cyber stuff is always important.
Well, I'm going to let Tony go first, and then I'll tell him how I'm living some of it right now based on current OMB guidance. So I'll let Tony go first.
It's a great question. As a CIO, I wish I had a nickel for every time I was told go cut 10%. I'd have a lot more money than I do at the moment. But probably the big lesson I've learned is, as a CIO, you've got lots of tools at your disposal, and there's the easy things to cut. There are the things that you can cut quickly, and then there's the right things. And I've always guided the teams to say, if we're going to cut, let's do cuts that are sustainable and are not going to sort of boomerang around and come back and whack us in 6 months or a year or 2 years. And so, in traditional terms, the easy things to cut are, the new application development budgets, the capabilities that you prioritized a few months earlier are easy to cut, because they're just started. They maybe haven't delivered on all the things that they were supposed to deliver, and it's easy to, in some cases, walk away from those. but you're walking away from your future in some sense. So I like to look at and challenge the teams to say, what are the, sustainable, wasteful, permanent kinds of things that we could do that in the long run would actually make us better and are not going to result in, problems down the road. Now, in some cases, what that's meant is actually doing an upgrade of some existing technology. Not to beat their horn, but EMC came to me one time with just such a proposal, and they said, we know you're facing a big budget cut. If you spend a little money with us, we can help you save a lot more. And similarly, other big tech companies have worked with me in the past to do those kinds of things. And so that's where I'd like to focus my efforts. And my advice would be, don't go do the short, easy things, because usually that comes back to haunt you in a big, bad, brutal way. And I've done it, because I had to, and it's either come back to bite me or bite my successor. And believe me, every one of them's let me know about it.
Right. It's the small investments that have large gains. And yeah, you're talking about opportunity cost, right? You just don't have enough cash in the bank to go after something, even though you know it's the right thing to do. And so you're scraping nickels together, and yeah, all of a sudden, 2 years later, it's whacking you on the back of the head, or 2 months later. All right, Karen, give it to us straight. Tell us what the real world's like over there right now.
Well, and so at the department, one of the challenges, and I think, Tony, you saw this from an OMB perspective this year, this fiscal year going forward in 21, the working capital fund, as in many other departments, has now gone away. There is no working capital fund at the department. So based on that, depending on what your funding streams are, what we've had to do is actually go back to, and we're going through the exercise right now of zero-based budgeting. So to Tony's point, is really knowing what services and what do they cost, and how you are then providing service to the customer. So it's really knowing what the operational costs are for the services, and then that then gives you the ability to say, okay, we can gain some efficiencies here. Some of the activity that was started prior to my arrival under the leadership of the Deputy CIO now, acting CIO Beth Capello, was really analyzing all the contracts that were currently in place at the department and doing some basic analysis of contracts and services provided, and is there duplication across all the contracts. So there are simple things, to Tony's point, of doing enterprise licensing and then doing the strategic sourcing associated with that, so that you can drive down the cost. So as vendors are doing work within the department, that we are overall optimizing the cost. And so not competing against one another, but that we're getting the best price and the lowest price for everyone who is using those contracts. So those efforts are underway, and there's like 3 enterprise licenses that we're putting in place that is supposed to, and so this again gets us to the partnership with the Chief Procurement Officer that'll have the terms and conditions in there that offers the lowest price. And then if the salespeople then sell to another component within the department, because I'm sure, Luke, you never experienced this, where a component believes that they're smarter than headquarters CIO, that if they sell to a component organization cheaper, that will become the new price, and that price then conveys out to the rest of the department, so we can gain efficiencies and savings from there. The other part, though, is working with the CFO and Congress and OMB for us to then be able to reinvest those savings, because if we get actual cost savings that's envisioned from, for example, like our transfer to the EIS contract from networks. And so the incentives are aligned there, but what we have to do is make sure we have the authority to be able to have an IT modernization fund since the working capital has gone forward so that we can invest that to the benefit of the entire department. And then I think some of the other efforts that have gone forward that now actually have meaning, but now have raised the bar for services is concepts such as network modernization and cloud first and data center consolidation and optimization have real meaning now as we have moved into this virtual environment. So things where initially DHS was maintaining a telework environment for 5,000 concurrent VPN connections. Now, because the right terms and conditions were in the contracts, as that foundation was laid forward by yourself and other of my predecessors, that we could spin up based on usage to go up to 120,000 concurrent users, right? And then it's going to be that balancing between what is the right mix between a virtual environment and a on-premise environment, which the contracts will allow us to spin back down again. So a lot of this is really knowing and analyzing what's there so that we don't have to do some of the things that, Luke, that was done in the past because the knowledge is there. Well, we have to do a straight across the board cut. What this ends up doing is making the business case and going forward and saying, okay, this is what it costs for all the services that you currently are using across the department. This is what we're paying for them. This is what it costs in order for us to be able to manage the risk and secure those, because as you know, the threat landscape has changed. So we've had to change how we are analyzing what is happening through the VPN connections, through those types of things. And this is what it costs. And so it becomes then a senior leadership, question and answer. What do you actually want to cut out of our services given what we are providing and the cost associated with that? And then how do you balance that against the other priorities of the department? And that's really the next level of what we're looking at with the department and the budget, so that I can answer the question and offer up alternatives when OMB says, hey, you got to take a cut in your top line budget. The idea would be, okay, maybe not necessarily from the CIO overall IT budget, even though, we have the largest civilian portfolio, and I think we're close to over $7 billion associated with that. But having the right business cases to say, okay, this is what we're supporting, here's where our analysis is, what do you want us to cut?
Yeah, and having that partnership with the CPO's organization so that you can put some variability into those contracts and be able to offer that sort of cut type situation and be able to execute that back into the contract. And I would imagine that TBM would be a big part of sort of making sure you're comparing the apples to the apples, as opposed to earlier today where somebody was comparing an apple to a chainsaw. And I'm still not sure how that happened, but it actually did come up in one of our panels. I love the idea of the cut, keep, and reinvest. I think that's really important. I think every CIO deserves to have that capability. And I know that when I was leaving federal service, there was a conversation at OMB about just a prices paid portal, right? So everyone knows what they paid for a widget, right? And so you can have some baseline there. I think that's really important. We had a question in the chat about zero trust, and I recognize that zero trust, it kind of reminds me of the conversation we had earlier about 5G, right? It's not just one widget, if you will. It's a constellation of activities, a constellation of technologies, et cetera, that sort of bind together and create zero trust, just like with 5G. The thought around, what is zero trust and what are those products and capabilities, it has come up. So I'll throw that out to you, Tony, first, since you brought it up. And then Karen, I saw you nod your head earlier when Tony brought it up about sort of where are we on this zero trust journey?
Well, it's still, I think, early days for zero trust. The concept is pretty simple. We in the technology industry, and I've contributed to it over the last, 60 years, have focused on maximum interoperability, so that anything that you create can be plugged into or networked or interfaced with almost everything else that we've ever created. And our standards bodies, our technology companies have done a marvelous job of making things interoperable. We've hit it out of the park in terms of success on that front.
Plug and play, right?
Yeah, it's just so rare. I mean, when was the last time you had anything that when you plugged it in, it didn't work? I just haven't experienced that in probably any number of years. But what we didn't do in terms of designing those great interoperable architectures is answer the question, should we interface? Should we connect? Is this a legitimate thing? And who is it, that we're connecting to? What is this thing? Is it safe? Is it a known quantity? Is it healthy? Is it performing in the way that it should? And so the zero trust concept is built up on a couple of ideas. One is known good things that you allow to connect one thing to the next, and sort of banning everything else. And as humans, we do this. We build up trust over a period of time. I've had great interactions with Karen. I've had great interactions with Luke. My level of trust with the two of you is really high based on your reputations and based on my interactions with you. There are others on this call that I don't know at all and have had no interaction with, and my level of trust is a lot lower. We need that same kind of thing, implemented across the entire ecosystem when it comes to, how we allow devices, software, hardware, things to connect one to the next. Now, the problem with all of this is it's hard to scale this and manage it. We live in a world where we've got, bazillions of virtual machines and containers and devices and software elements and all the rest of it. And managing that zero trust architecture at scale is still one of the big technology challenges that we face. And there's a number of companies that are, I think, starting to do a pretty good job of it. But that's really the challenge today. You can't do it by manually controlling access control lists and permissions, in traditional firewalls and those kinds of things. That's just not a great approach.
Way too many moving parts, and they're moving not even by the day, by the hour, by the second, quite frankly.
Right.
You've got to have some machine-to-machine sort of brains in the middle of this, I would imagine. Karen, any thoughts on zero trust as you all embark on this journey?
Yeah, and the department has some use cases underway, but I think based on some of the things that Tony has outlined, and then based on my previous work as the Assistant Secretary for Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, and working with the national labs, there's several concepts that can be integrated together in order to be able to get to a risk profile that a department can manage. Because what we're really talking about is balancing, right, the risk tolerance to be able to manage assets. And to Tony's point, the Internet of Things kind of blowing up everything, so anything can connect, and it's going to be interoperable. And so the idea of trying to establish a perimeter, the edge changes every day. So it just depends on what your overall risk tolerance is. So with that concept, and we're living it today, right? Because the tolerance has gone up in a virtual environment. And I'll give you an example. when we were all on-prem in a department, the whole idea of doing remote printing from home when you were teleworking was no, because you had to deal with the information controls, control that unclassified information, what kind of printer, how are you controlling the actual document that you print off in your house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now the risk tolerance has gone up and we're working on potential solutions that would allow users to either be able to use their own printers, because some of the initial thing was, well, we're going to buy printers and ship them out to everybody. Well, if we do that, right, in the long run, maybe that's not the right solution. And how do you balance this by allowing us to be able to manage and really look at what is that landscape, how are they doing things through the VPN, and then certain amount of assurances that a person who is then printing from a printer at home, because they're already going across their personal network to make the VPN connection anyway. So how are we going to work that? And the risk tolerance is a little bit higher because not everybody has multiple networks or printers or any of these capabilities for a sustained environment. So we're integrating and testing use cases and then also looking at our target architectures, but really spitting out and knitting together segments so that we can say, okay, here's biometrics, here's stuff that we're looking at from artificial intelligence, to your point, Luke, about machine to machine, because we can't do all of this. And how do we knit those two segment architectures together to a target architecture that clearly identifies how much risk we're willing to live with? So an example that we're looking at right now deals with unclassified video conferencing, because we're using it right now. And so obviously our risk tolerance is up. So Tony, to your point, it's not, I can't control the platforms because there's a new platform every day. Just saw another one on a commercial the other day. So people are going to use what is convenient for them to use. But what I can control is what the department is standardizing on. And then what are the interactions, and then what are the mitigating controls that I can put in place. And one of the things that we're working on with the national labs also was CCE, which is consequence-driven cybersecurity engineering. So it's really looking at, and the easiest way to explain this is, what is the most important thing? The data, right? The conversation that we're having right now on video conferencing, or the actual capability of video conferencing. So I would submit in an unclass environment, especially forums such as this that is wide open, it's not necessarily the content, but it's the capability, because we saw it, right? Like I had to sit there and fix my webcam and change the option. Tony had to deal with the modulation of his volume. It has to do with the capability. So the capability in this particular case is more important. So what kind of things do I have to do? What kind of analysis do I have to have in place? And to Tony, to your point, the operational supply chain, how do I then, once I've selected a solution, how do I continuously and analyze all those different moving parts to make sure as things get upgraded, as things get introduced, that I'm actually managing that supply chain, not just the original software or what Microsoft is doing, but all the interactions across all the different types of capabilities as it interacts with the department. And so that use is underway so that we can then channel it back into, okay, this is what it means for us to do zero trust in an unclassified video conferencing capability. This is what it means for us to do zero trust while we're trying to build out artificial intelligence. So I think we're going to see it mature along those lines.
Fantastic, interesting topic. Well, I have to bring this one up since you sort of touched on it, and you know, we're living in a virtual world, right? Does the world stay virtual as we go forward? Is there a virtual NOSC someday? I mean, what's sort of sitting in where you're sitting, in the role that you're in now, and the roles that you've been in? You know, what does that look like? And knowing what you've learned and discovered over the past 6 months, I ask you both, but I'm going to start with Karen on this one. What's that look like? Are we just going to live in a virtual world now and just press forward and you know, get these skills and abilities all over the country that just get virtually matrix together to defend the country? What's it look like?
So this is the Cyber Resilience Summit, right? And so resiliency would allow for us to have a distributed infrastructure that would allow for us to do the services. And so it's about resiliency. And I think the one thing that the environment that we're in has clearly demonstrated that the services my predecessors have put in place are resilient, but that we have to continue to make sure that that resiliency is there regardless, because as you know, we have to keep the operations going, and that's what the NOSC is about, really. And so it'll also help with recruitment. But the other part doesn't mean that everybody has to be, for example, at 7th and D, where I sit. They don't have to be there. Today, I'm coming to you, I'm teleworking from home. It's really about, can we really look at the right mixture of services? Some of the things will still have to be on site, you know that, unless we can come up with, we challenge industry to do this, right? A classified virtual environment moving forward, right? We have classified video conferencing, but we're still limited based on the physical place where we have to be, or the physical way that those connections occur. So that, I think, does limit us a little bit, but as far as class and as far as the work goes forward and doing a lot of the network operations and keeping that going forward, I would be remiss if I didn't say yes, we're going to continue in this environment, especially since we're at the Cyber Resilience Summit.
Fantastic. Very interesting insight there. Tony, you sort of see this from a lot of different dimensions as well. What's your perspective on where this all goes?
Well, I think a couple of things are fairly predictable. One is, you know, for every big wave that happens, and right now we're living through COVID and, you know, we're all having to be virtual, whether we want to or not. All of these things have aftershocks and waves that happen, and most of the time multiple waves over time. So I think immediately once, you know, we get past the current COVID crisis, whenever that is, you're going to see a reversion where people will, you know, go back as quickly as they can. In some cases, we humans are herd animals. We love being around other people. We like our football games, our concerts, our, you know, knitting circle, whatever it happens to be, we like to be with other people. But the next wave after that is another reversion, which is, hey, you know, I don't have to be here 100% of the time. I can be here 20% of the time, or 30%, or whatever is appropriate. And I can also use this great network and technology that we've put in place to connect to people that I couldn't easily connect to in the old world, where I felt I had to travel someplace, you know, to connect to somebody. So I think we're going to see, you know, some really exciting things happen. You know, I got to say that even as difficult as some of this still is to use, whether it's turning on your camera or getting the sound right, it's getting better and better and better and better. You know, 3 years ago, you couldn't have done this the way we're doing this today, with as few problems. And I look forward to that world. I think that we're going to be able to do some really great things with this technology, but we are also herd animals, and we love being with one another and, you know, hoisting a beer or smoking a cigar or cheering on our favorite sports teams. And I think that extends into the work environment. There's some things that we just love to do together, and it's better to be there in person, and other things we'll figure out pretty quickly. Don't need to be there, you know, not going to be there. You know, we're going to figure out a different way to do those things.
You know, any of these big shifts like this always have unintended consequences. Sometimes they're good, and sometimes they're They're not good, but a lot of times there's always a silver lining that we learn from these activities, and that's a great message to end with. Tracy, Bill, are you out there?
We're here. Yeah. Thanks much, Luke. Thanks for partnering with me
Okay,
today.
just wanna wrap this up. Bill, over to you. First of all, I want to thank Karen and Tony for bookending this on this super important day of Cyber Resilience Summit and giving these closing marks and great thought process around what we can anticipate into the future. Thank you very much. Bill, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Luke, and thanks for partnering with me today to bring the Cyber Resilience Summit to life and keep
My
it all
pleasure.
on time. I want to thank everybody who stayed throughout the day, and I want to thank all our speakers. This was really probably the best summit we've had, although we've had some great ones. But even though it had to be in virtual space, normally at this time we'd all prepare out to the upper porch at the Army Navy Club and order some libations from the folks there. I guess this time you'll just have to go to your refrigerator and hope there's a cold one there. But I want to thank everybody, especially thank our sponsors for providing the funds for us to create this conference and bring it all together. And we look forward to seeing you next year at the same time, hopefully at the Army Navy Club this time, where we can have the good networking. And in between now and then, figure out how we can keep this country cyber secure. Goodbye.
And I want to thank Tracy as well and everyone else that put this thing together. A lot of hard work to pull these things also, as you all know. So thank you very much, Tracy and crew.
Goodbye.
Bye now.